My name is Mark, and for a short time, I was a lighthouse keeper. Not a historic one, just a summer relief caretaker for a private foundation managing the old Osprey Rock Light off the coast of Maine. It was my dream assignment, 3 weeks of isolation. The smell of salt and diesel and nothing but the ocean for company. The lighthouse itself was a beautiful, severe structure, a tall, white cylinder perched on a concrete island of rock. Below the lens room was the watch deck, and below that, the living quarters, a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a communications room. It was all automated now. My only real job was maintenance and log entries. The first 10 days were peaceful, monotonous bliss. Then the sand started. I found the first small pile on the 11th morning, right at the base of the winding, open-tread iron staircase. It was a perfect, damp crescent of saltwater-soaked black sand, the kind you find below the tide line. I thought I'd tracked it in myself. I swept it up, logged the routine maintenance, and forgot about it. 2 days later, the pile was back. Same spot, same composition, but larger. It was impossible. I hadn't been outside that day. The outer door was heavy, secured by 3 separate locks, and I always wiped my boots on the mat inside the door. This sand had come from somewhere above me, or it had materialized from the structure itself. A knot of unease formed in my stomach, cold and heavy as a ship's anchor. I cleaned it up again, then placed a small, almost invisible piece of masking tape across the door jamb of the top-level maintenance room, directly below the lens. It was just an old storage closet I never used. I wanted to know if anyone or anything was accessing it. The next morning, the masking tape was undisturbed, but the sand was back at the foot of the stairs, bigger still. That night, the real terror began. I was sitting in the communications room reading when the deep, vibrating hum of the generator suddenly cut out. The whole tower went pitch black, complete, suffocating blackness, only broken by the faint glow of the sea reflecting off the mist outside the lantern room high above me. I checked my watch. 3:07 a.m. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and hurried down to the engine room. The generator was dead. The automatic logs showed no mechanical fault, no power surge it was, as if someone had simply thrown the main breaker switch. It took me a cold, sweaty hour to reboot the system and get the immense bulb back on, painting the churning sea with its steady, cyclical beam. I logged it as a system hiccup. The next night, I stayed awake. I sat right by the main breaker. At 3:07 a.m., the generator didn't fail. The entire building went silent, and the tower plunged into darkness. This time, I watched the breaker. It had not tripped. The switch was still in the on position, yet the power was gone. It was like the flow of electricity was simply erased from the wires. As I started to rise, preparing to go down and manually restart the massive engine, I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in a modern building. It wasn't metal groaning under pressure or the whine of the wind. It was a slow, ragged scraping, a sound like wet canvas or heavy barnacle-encrusted leather being dragged across the spiral steps of the iron stairwell, heading down. The noise was intermittent, followed by a heavy, wet thump on the metal tread, then another scrape, and another thump, always getting closer, always descending from the blackness above the watch deck. I froze, heart hammering a desperate rhythm against my ribs. I turned off my flashlight, letting the night swallow me completely. The only light was the brief, weak flash of the moon reflecting off the water outside the windows. The scraping continued, agonizingly slow. I could now feel the faint vibration of each heavy, wet thump through the floor plates. It had to be a hallucination. My isolation was getting to me, but the sand, ... and the switch. The dragging sound paused. It stopped on the landing directly above my head. I could hear a sound now that was almost a shallow, rasping breath, followed by the distinct, sickening sound of water dripping onto the metal floor. I stayed silent, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The air around me suddenly dropped 10 degrees. Then from the inky darkness above, a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was deep, waterlogged, and impossibly close. It was the sound of a man who had drowned years ago trying to expel the sea from his lungs. It didn't speak words, it simply emitted a noisa, long, drawn-out gurgle, followed by my name. Maya Ark, ... I didn't wait. I bolted from the room, not down to the engine, but up. Up the stairs, past the scraping darkness, past the maintenance room, until I reached the locked glass door of the lantern room. I threw the bolt, scrambled inside, and slammed the door shut, locking it with a desperate, shaking hand. The light was still dead. It was absolutely dark, except for the glass all around me reflecting the hostile, endless night. I pressed myself against the heavy lens housing. Below me, I could hear the scraping sound again, growing louder as whatever it was reached the final tight spiral beneath the lantern room. It stopped right beneath the steel hatch of the watch deck. I never heard a door open, but I heard the shaking of the glass. I heard a sound like a single heavy object being dragged around the watch deck's perimeter, testing the walls. Then the scraping began on the exterior of the main cylinder. Slowly, impossibly, it was climbing the outside of the tower. I screamed and slammed my hands against the main breaker. Nothing. I slammed it again. And this time, with a violent, shuddering crack, the engine roared back to life. The main light flared on, blinding and majestic, turning the entire tower into a beacon of furious, momentary safety. I kept the light on for the rest of my rotation, never leaving the lantern room after midnight. I never saw the figure, but on the morning I was due to be relieved, I found the sand again. It wasn't on the steps. It was a perfect, soaking wet pile, placed neatly on my pillow, and resting atop it was a single, long, black barnacle. I never went back to Osprey Rock. The Foundation replaced me, logging my departure as stress and exhaustion. I heard later that the new caretaker lasted only 4 days before radioing for an emergency pickup. When they asked him why, all he said was that the main light kept dying at 3:07 a.m. and that when he went to restart the generator, he kept finding piles of sand and long dragging claw marks leading from the outer door to the spiral staircase. And he said the light didn't just turn off. It was like someone on the inside was throwing the switch, but always waiting right there in the dark just to say his name.